My experience with Craigslist hasn't always been bad. My name is Francesco and I'm 23 years old. Back when I was 19, I was really into thrifting and buying vintage clothing and jewelry. I've been looking through a few websites and found that Craigslist offered a lot of amazing hidden treasures at affordable prices. I stumbled upon a page with tons of vintage band tees. The person was listed as living in the same town as me, so I decided to contact them. Within an hour or so of emailing them, I received a reply from a guy named Chris. The exchange went pretty well actually, and he even offered to lower the prices for me since I had inquired about buying all of the band tees from him. Again, the exchange went so well I didn't see any red flags when he asked me for my number so that he could call me when he decided to finally meet up. We agreed to meet up in the parking lot of our local Target. When the time came to meet up, he had sent me a text asking me if we could meet up at his house instead. Honestly quite annoyed since I'd already began driving to our agreed upon location, I also got a bit uneasy. I told him in our previous conversation that I would feel more comfortable meeting in public, especially when he insisted we meet at his home. Again, I didn't see the obvious red flags right away, but my stupid younger self really wanted those band tees. I decided to meet up with him at his house. He texted me his address and I began driving to his location. I got quite frustrated when I realized it was a 25-minute drive from where we originally decided to meet. When I told him this, he began to apologize and insisted he'd offer me a larger discount in exchange of me driving so far. I began driving to his address, but I couldn't help but notice how much more distant each house got from each other the further I drove. Red flags definitely started going crazy at this point. I'm not sure why I ignored them and kept driving. At about 7 p.m. or so, I finally pulled up to his address. The house looked completely deserted and I couldn't help but notice how unkempt everything was. Against my greater judgment, I got out of my car and decided to call Chris and let him know I was here. The entire time I was leaning against my car, I couldn't help but shake off the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. Before I could even dial his number, he had sent me a text letting me know he saw me pull up. This made me extremely uncomfortable. Chris followed up with another text stating he was back in his shed looking for the band tees. I replied no problem and that I would be waiting for him in my car. He followed up again with a text that still makes my blood run cold to this day. If you help me find them, I'll give them all to you for free. Without even considering any other outcomes, I put my car in drive and took off so fast my tires screeched. Chris must have heard this because he tried calling me at least 5 times, none of which I answered. After ignoring all of his calls, I didn't hear from him again, and I thought I wouldn't be haunted by this event anymore. About a year or so later, I had received an email from my mom with a link to a news article and a message pleading with me to please be careful. The article stated that the remains of 2 women were found scattered throughout the town I live in. Their head, limbs, and torso found in separate places. The article only got more twisted from here. A 3rd woman was found intact, a couple miles down from the address Chris had given me, still not fully decomposed. To this day, I wonder if this was all a complete coincidence, or what could have been my gruesome demise. My name is Vicky and I'm 25 years old. About 4 years ago now, I had a frightening close encounter with someone I met on Craigslist. I'll be honest, I haven't always thought rationally and made choices based solely on what I needed now without considering the bad that could follow. One night after getting home from work, I wanted nothing more than to get right to bed. While laying in bed, I got a text from my roommate Annie asking if I could clean the kitchen at some point this week. To be honest, she asked me in a completely polite tone, but I took it personally. What happens next, I'm not proud of one bit. I stormed out of my room and began pounding on her door. Annie opened the door confused, asking me what the problem was. Long story short, we got into a heated argument over something as petty as cleaning up the kitchen. I told Annie I'd be moving out later that week and she could clean her own damn kitchen. In hindsight, I really let my exhaustion and stress control my emotions. Annie's nothing but sweet, the ideal roommate. Later that night, I began searching through Craigslist for a room for rent. Everything was completely out of my budget, and I knew if I took on any of those rooms, it would cut into my other bills. About 5 pages in, I finally found a room that was suitable and in my price range. The room was located in a decent part of town and was close to my job and the gym I went to. An added plus was that the homeowner was looking for female roommates only. However, the listing didn't show any pictures of the room itself. It showed only a picture of the front of the house and a picture of the backyard, which was huge. I began by texting the homeowner. They replied rather quickly and introduced themselves as Olivia. I told her a bit about my situation and how I needed a place right away. Olivia let me know that we could meet up tomorrow, and if the room was to my liking, I could move in at any time. The following day, I drove up to Olivia's home. It was late in the day, roughly 6 or 7 p.m. I texted Olivia letting her know I was there, and she took a few minutes before responding. She told me that she was running late, but she placed the key under the mat and I could get a head start touring her home. I asked her what room I'd be taking, but she didn't respond. After waiting about 10 minutes and not getting a response, I decided to make my way inside. I put the key into the lock and opened the front door. Immediately upon opening the door, I got hit with a foul stench. It was terrible. I've never smelled anything like it. I put my shirt up to my nose to help mask the awful smell that came from the house. Feeling a bit curious and snoopy, I began looking through the house. The house looked like it had current occupants, but at the same time, no one had been there for a while. For example, personal mail had started piling up by the front door. The dishes that were left in the sink had mold all over them. And well, the fridge had produce that had gone bad and milk that had expired over 2 months ago. The smell coming from the fridge was bad, but nothing like the stench that found itself throughout the entire home. I kept looking through the house until I finally got to the garage. The kitchen had been built on the other side of the garage and had a door that connected both rooms. The smell intensified the closer I got to the garage door. I'm not sure why, but I got a sinking feeling in my gut when I put my hand up to the garage door, as if my body was preparing me for what I saw next. I opened the garage door and was immediately hit with the most intense smelling of rotting meat, followed by the sound of buzzing from flies. I made the mistake of looking through the garage. Walking past a car that had been parked in the garage, I saw the decomposing body of a man. His face was frozen in shock and fear, as mine was as well. My body went into shock as I witnessed the most horrific sight I had ever been met with. It was so gruesome. I'll spare you the details. I had completely forgotten about Olivia and the fact that I planned to rent a room from her. I honestly thought I had gone into the wrong home until I looked through my text and saw that I was at the correct address. The silence that filled the room was now interrupted by the sound of a door creaking open ever so silently. I peered back like a deer and could see the door that had been previously closed on the hall was now open. The faintest sound of breathing could be heard coming from behind the door. I ran as fast as I could out of the house, screaming, trying to attract as much attention as I could. I'm fortunate the neighborhood was in a decent part of town. I ran to a neighboring home where a couple in their 50s were sitting outside enjoying the summer heat. Through tears and sobbing, I told the couple what I had just witnessed. The wife hugged and comforted me, while the husband got on the phone with 911 and left to retrieve his shotgun. Police showed up within minutes and searched the entire home. The person who owned the home was a man in his 80s. He had been bludgeoned to death. Police confirmed there had been someone living in that home after the elderly man had been murdered. Police also found food wrappers, human waste, and filthy clothes in one of the rooms, further detailing someone had been inhabiting the room. After speaking with police for over 2 hours, I finally got home. I broke down and apologized to my roommate. I constantly have nightmares about that night, and the image of the elderly man has been burned into my mind. At times, I feel like I could still hear that faint breathing. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I use Craigslist to try to sell some of my older tools I had no longer use for. My buddy raves about his experience selling his old stuff on Craigslist, and how he was able to make a few extra bucks in a pinch. I'm not the wealthiest person, and I find myself being pretty damn strapped for cash most times. I didn't have much luck on the site for the first few days. To be honest, I was getting pretty discouraged and upset since rent was coming up soon and I didn't have all of that money made up yet. By the end of my workday, I had received a text from a number I didn't recognize. The person had asked if the cordless drill I was selling was still available. I let him know it was and told him I wouldn't be able to go lower than the asking price. He told me it wasn't a problem and wanted to stop by when he got off work around 7. I didn't see an issue with it since some people got off work later and I still hadn't lost complete faith in humanity. The time came for him to stop by and pick up the drill, but I didn't receive a call or text from him. I decided to give him a few more minutes and still hadn't heard from him yet. I figured he must have gotten caught up at work or stuck in traffic. I decided to give him until 8. 8 came around rather quickly, and by this point, he still hasn't reached out to me. I figured even if he was going to be late, the least he could do was send me a text letting me know he'd be late. I stepped onto the porch to have a smoke, and I couldn't help but notice a car parked a couple houses down from mine that I hadn't seen in my neighborhood before. This all took place during the later part of fall. It was starting to get dark out faster, but as dark as it was outside, I could still see the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. I assumed it was the guy I was supposed to sell the drill to. Maybe he had gotten lost and couldn't find my address. I began to wave over at the car and gesture for him to pull up. I gave a warm smile to let him know it was me and they could pull up in front of my house. The car turned on and the tires began to roll, but to my surprise the car took off at a rather fast speed past my home. A bit confused by the situation, I decided it was best I get back into my home for my safety. A couple hours had passed since the incident took place when I received a text from the same number from earlier. The person told me they would stop by around 11 or so and we would be able to do the transaction then. At this point, I no longer had interest in selling him the drill. I began to have a bad feeling about this guy, and I didn't want him to step anywhere near my home. About a minute or so later, I received another text from him asking if we could stop by now. I ignored his text as well, and again he sent another text, but this time he texted me hello in all caps with a bunch of exclamation points. Another minute or so had passed, and he texted me again. This time he sent me 3 question marks. I was starting to get fed up with this guy. He was clearly not okay. About an hour or so had passed and I hadn't received another text. I stood up to grab myself a beer from the fridge when I heard the ding sound coming from my phone, alerting me to a new text message. I already knew who it could be, and at this point I was going to give him hell. As I predicted, it was him again. And when I opened the message, I was shocked to see he had sent me a picture of me sitting on my couch watching TV. He had taken this picture through the living room window, and it was followed by another text saying, "Is the drill still available?" Without thinking twice, I ran over to my safe to retrieve my Smith & Wesson revolver. I aimed my gun at the window, and like a madman, I began to yell at whoever was out there to leave before I shot them dead. I about shit myself when I began to hear knocking coming from the front door. The son of a bitch asked again if the drill was available, with a slight chuckle in his voice. He began pounding on the door and started to yell like a lunatic. Without thinking twice, I sent 2 rounds through the door. I never thought I'd have to use my gun for self-defense. After a moment or so of silence, I could hear footsteps running away from my home and the car turn on before speeding away. Even though I didn't see the car, I was convinced it was the same car from earlier. I stepped out to assess the damage to my home. Luckily, the bullets didn't strike anything or anyone. After the car took off, the neighborhood became a frenzied mess and police were called. Luckily, I live in a 2A friendly state and wasn't charged for anything. I didn't receive any more texts from this number after that, and I hadn't gotten any other late night visitors again.